Is relisting your listings on Etsy a good strategy, or is it going to hurt your shop? Let's find out. Hey, I'm Duthie, and I want to debunk all the myths that are going around and help you be a better seller on Etsy. So today I'm going to look at relisting. We're going to talk about what it is, what we've been told about it, what the myths are that other people say, what I think about it, the science I do for this, and my final conclusions of what I think about relisting an item on Etsy. So the first thing is, of course, what is relisting? And that is simply, in a listing on Etsy, when you create it, it runs for 4 months, but you get the option of relisting it, restarting the clock again at any time that you want, paying that 20 cents again, and it'll go back to the 4 months again, and it'll appear as new. Now, Etsy does tell us that newer items or relisted items get a slight boost in the search. So that comes on to what people think about this. Now, it used to be in days gone by that relisting, having the newest item, was the only way to be seen in search. The newest items ranked the highest, so people would renew constantly. They would relist their item again and again and again, many times throughout the day. And if they had a lot of items, this could really add up, but it was the only way to do it. But from 2020, when the changes happened on Etsy to the algorithm, then this did make less difference as there was lots more factors. However, people still think relisting, renewing your items is good because it gives that boost in being seen. So there are a lot of experts out there giving the advice to renew your listings. Well, firstly, what does Etsy say about it? Etsy says not to use renewing, relisting as a strategy. It doesn't want us to do this. And as your place in search is based on the history of what the algorithm thinks your listing is going to do, if you relist and you get seen higher in search for a certain search term and the customers see that and don't click on it, you're sending a negative signal to Etsy. You're potentially telling them that this item is no good for this search term. So myself and quite a few other people figured that renewing could bring back diminishing returns. The more you renewed, the less you get boosted until eventually your listing falls off the map. And so standard advice from many of us is, once you've completely changed your SEO, when you're aiming for different keywords, or if you've significantly changed your images, if you think you've improved your item, then by all means renew so that Etsy gets another chance to look. Etsy gets another chance to show you to the customers. And if your item behaves differently, then that could be a good thing and you'll start ranking. So that's been the advice, but that's based on nothing more than what we imagine. So I decided to again do some science on this. And what science, I hear you ask? Well, again, I used my new dead shop. For those that don't know, I started a shop last year just to see what it was like to start a shop in 2019, to run all sorts of tests on it. And it's a fairly dead shop. I had some sales in the beginning, but I just literally do not have time to run it. So it's my testing shop. And disclaimer, before I did this, I made sure I'm not breaking any Etsy terms and conditions. They just advise against relisting, but I'm not going to get my shop shut down for doing this. So relisting will affect the placement of my item in all places, in all searches, but I just want to look at one search term. It's easier to track just one search term, so I looked at custom dog portrait. This was a little harder to rank for than my dog portrait digital. And I chose this little Schnauzer dog to see how he would get on in the ranking when I relisted. And basically what I've been doing, relisting, checking the ranking to see how quickly the position moves, and then checking every so often to see how it drops down. Relisting a bunch of times, relisting once a day, doing lots of messing about with relisting. I relisted a whole ton of times over a few days, and then I left it alone to see what happened over time, what position it would settle out into. Now let's get into these results. Some of them are a little unexpected, not quite what I thought, and I will try and give you my conclusion at the end. So, the results. So this listing for custom dog portrait, before I relisted it, it was ranking on page number 2 at position 91. So it's capable of ranking, it's just not doing great. If that was a listing for a term that you were wanting to, for a keyword that you were wanting to be seen for, position 91 is a long way away. Buyers most often buy from what they see on the very first page. So you really want to be on page 1 as much as you possibly can. So I relisted, and 10 minutes after the relist, it was still on page 2 at position 91. But then a further 10 minutes, so 20 minutes after the change, it had moved and it was now on page 1 and it had shot up to position 21. And after another 10 minutes, so 30 minutes in total, it was still on position 21. I decided to test and see by doing another relist. We were wanting to fit as many of these in as we could. So I thought I would see if relisting got it any higher. So I relisted, and 10 minutes and 20 minutes after relisting, it was still in the same place at position 21. So there was no boost from relisting again. And then after 30 minutes of this second renew, my item started to drop. Now it was at position 27. That's gone down a whole 6 positions. I let it run for an hour. It was at position 28 and I gave it another relist. And this time it only went up to position 27. I gave it a couple of hours, relisted again, and after the 10-20 minutes it was up to position 23. So not as high as the initial position 21, but it's certainly still getting up there. And 40 minutes after that relist, that listing was dropping again. After a couple of hours it was down to position 32, still page 1. And then I left it for a whole day to let it slip down the rankings, and it had hit page 2, position 70, so not as low as where it had started. I renewed and it got up to position 28 on page 1. Left it 90 minutes or so, renewed, and it got up to position 29. So it's starting to not get as high in the search with each renew. Renewed again another 90 minutes in, and it's at position 31 on page 1. I left it till the next day, not quite 24 hours, and it had gone down to page 2, only at position 57. Renewed again, and it got up to position 29 on page 1. That is quite a bit further down. After half an hour, another renew, and it's at position 26, so a little bit higher. Another half an hour, and it's at position 24, so it's clawing up a little bit. I let it sit for a couple of hours and renewed it again, and it's only going up to position 27. Let it sit for a day, and when I looked, it was on page 2 at position 70 again. So it's only lasting a few hours on page 1 before it slips all the way down. Renewed, and it got up to position 23, so that's not bad. Now, I let it sit for another day, and it was on page 2 at position 65. Relisted, and this is where things get a little bit odd. It gets up to page 1, position 48. But it's not the only listing there. Out of nowhere, this other listing of mine is also on page 1. I have done nothing to this listing. It's not particularly gained any followers, sales, or views. So for some reason, a random other listing has come out of nowhere. But let the original listing do nothing for a day, and then it's down to position 76 again. Time to renew, and this time it only gets up to position 55. That's significantly lower. It's still on page 1, but that's a lot lower. So what I decided to do on this day was just to keep relisting every 20 to 30 minutes. Not exactly on the time because I'm not a robot, but every 20 to 30 minutes I would relist. So the first few times of relisting, it stayed on page 2 at position 55. Then the third time relisting, it finally got up to page 1, position 27. And I renewed a whole bunch of times and it just stayed in the same position. Then I left it alone for a few days just to see, because quite rightly I was asked how these kind of things work over time. So I wanted it to drift back down to its new position, and its new position was quite a change. It's now on page 3 at position 113. So in conclusion, has it hurt my listing? Well, it's possible to say that it has, because that listing is now sitting a whole page lower than it was before. And certainly each time I renewed, it never got back up to that high of position 21. However, I now have a new listing doing really well for this search term. And it's not one of the others having moved up to take the place. This is one that's come out of nowhere to position number 1. So this is very strange. And this listing that came out of nowhere is also on page 1 for Dog Portrait Digital as well. So it shows there's a lot more going on with the algorithm than we know. Who knows what could have happened? There could have been just a single view, or other people's listings might not be doing so well. Some might have expired or something that I don't know about. That's why it's difficult to do a long-term test, because we can't control all the variables, because some of the variables, many of the variables, are other people, either sellers or customers. And from using my Spotted on Etsy tool, when I looked at that listing that I'd been relisting, it had also started to rank for the term miniature schnauzer. So it's not just the one you're looking at that's affected, all sorts of keywords can be affected. So in conclusion here, it seems like there's a slight decrease or a slight law of diminishing returns with renewing. It certainly isn't looking like a great strategy to do all the time, and if you've been seen by the customers and they're not liking it, there's no point in keeping doing the same thing. They're still not going to like it. I will say, as I said before, definitely if you've made significant changes and you want Etsy to look at this listing again, absolutely give it a renew. Also, if you know this item's been doing well for a really kind of good keyword, but it's dropped away a little bit, it doesn't hurt to pick a time when most of your customers are on and give it a relist or two, just to get it out there in front of your customers and see how they respond to it. Get it out there at the time when most buyers are there. So possibly in the run up to Christmas, at the beginning, well, at the middle of October, give that a try with some of your listings. Just for a day or two, give them a couple of renews and see what happens. But if they get seen a bunch of times and people aren't clicking and buying, then time to change your SEO.